All right. My mic was off. GM. We'll give people a moment to get in here, including my co-host. But while I'm waiting, this is Eben Matthews, co-founder of Macroverse. Hello, Henry slash Dimsum. Good to see you. We should have a few other people popping in. And fortunately, this is also being recorded for posterity. And although I can't say it's necessarily as permanent as something on chain, but it should be sticking around for a while. So here's Adam. Hello, Matt. Hello, Tiny. Hello, Lady Valor. A nice batch of greenlit creators here as well. Thank you guys for coming in. Adam, are you here?
Yes. No, it was just thinking hard about that.
Thinking hard. Okay, good.
Yes.
Well, for anyone that hasn't been into one of these sessions yet, I'm sure a handful of other people will probably pop in. This is going to be a weekly thing here on Twitter Spaces now. This is round 2 of Storytelling 101 masterclasses. And we wanted to switch from doing them in our Macroverse Discord to Twitter Spaces to kind of make this more widely available to the general community and to invite more people from other communities to come in and hopefully absorb something of value around creating stories, telling stories, making content, wherever someone's interest may lie, whether it's as a fan or as a existing creator or someone that wants to make stuff. We hope this session and future sessions will be valuable. And then just to be transparent, the other reason is we are in the very beginning of a ramp up to the next kind of significant milestone for what we're building at Macroverse, which is the launch of the first batch of what we believe are the first true NFT comics. And we'll talk a lot more about what that is. We hope people will come and interact with us and find out a lot more about what that is. We'll be talking about what the different series are, who the amazing creators are that we're working with, the technology that we've built. There's a lot of really exciting things coming, and this space over the next several months will also start to bring in more information about that, other collaborators that we're working with for their perspectives on a lot of these topics. So this will be kind of a growing, evolving storytelling, content creating, evolution of storytelling in Web3, kind of combination of topics. But to bring it back to the matter at hand, we want these first handful of sessions to be a bit of a overview on how we approach storytelling, franchise building, world building, and how we approach kind of creating something more from scratch. And then we'll get into some feedback for people that are submitting concepts and stories via the Discord. And this is also the opportunity as a collector of one of our Macroverse series, whether that's Dead Town or GSA or soon to be other franchises as well. This is also the opportunity to come into round 2 of pitching stories which can ultimately get greenlit into production and seeing those produced as your very own NFT comics as well. So lots to do, and I'm going to hand a lot of this session over to my co-founder, Adam. But before I do, one last little bit of context. Everyone else on our team is too humble to brag about us, so I'm going to do it for us. But between myself, Adam, and our third co-founder, Ricky, just a little bit of background. We have been involved in creating content for film, television, video games, new media, comics, animation, kind of you name it, we've probably made it for the last, kind of 25 years each. So, we've got about 75 years of collective experience making the stuff that we all love to consume. And so, we're coming at this from a little bit of a different perspective than I think many other projects in the space are. And that's not to disparage any other projects by any means, but I think we actually have a very clear understanding of what it takes, not just to think about how to make all this stuff, but actually how to bring it from, point A idea and conception all the way to real thing that exists in the world for people to interact with and consume. And then you add this kind of technology layer and platform layer on top of all that. And for us, and I'm certainly speaking for myself, but I think I speak for all of us, everything I've done over the entire course of my career has brought all these dots together to this point. I've never been more excited over the course of anything that I've been building or working on. And so it's just extremely exciting to be in this moment in time and to kind of be able to share a lot of the things that we've learned and our approach to creating these sorts of things with as many people as possible. So this is one of the ways we feel like we can give some value back to this space, which we've so fallen in love with. So since we're starting with characters, a lot of us are coming at this from the idea of we own these characters now. All of a sudden in this ownership economy, in this participation economy of Web3, whether they're collections from our different franchises or you're rocking PFPs and characters from other collections and franchises, we've got characters. And one of the amazing things we've seen happen in this space is people doing all sorts of things with those characters, derivative projects, storytelling projects, taking characters from one collection and turning them into something else. So there's this composable layer of storytelling, which is also just fundamental to storytelling in general, which is all about character. And I'm going to hand this off to Adam to kind of do a little deeper dive in. But it all starts with who are the characters in the story that you're telling, and why do we care about these characters? How do you make us care about these characters? And as the kind of core and source of what happens from there, my co-founder, Adam Martin.
It's a very dramatic intro, but thank you very much.
Hey man, we're doing storytelling. Dun, dun,
yeah, with
dun.
This, yeah, no, it's funny. And I just want to echo kind of part of what Evan says. It is, I think it is the fun thing about what we have been doing over the last really 20 plus years is making shit and doing stuff in this industries, in be it comics and live action and video games and animation and all these different kind of cool things. And just before I dive in, just as I kind of, I don't know, just to lend a little credence to that, my daughter has just arrived in India. She's teaching at a school for a few weeks for the summer, and she was like meeting the kids and chatting with them, and apparently the kids were like blown away because I worked on the original Transformers, whatever that was, 15 years ago. And one of my daughter's earliest memories was coming to set and meeting meeting the robots. And what I had done is, because she was with her grandparents for the summer, out of town while I was working on the movie, I had been writing to her and telling her stories about the robots as if they were real. And they were like the spoiled ones, and there was a funny one, and there was this. So like she came back to LA, having been gone for a little bit, age 4 at that time, wanting to meet the robots. I was like, oh shit, I've totally cornered myself, right? I thought I was telling this really sweet story, and now I'm in trouble. So I brought her the set, and like the cars were there. And I was like, okay, well they're sleeping now, so that's why they're in car form. And she came around and met the robots, and it ultimately, of course, all kind of imploded because she realized that they weren't real a couple of years later, and then that caused her to question, the Easter Bunny, and then Santa Claus, and then the Tooth Fairy, and all that. Like these kind of childhood dominoes just collapsed around this thing. But that had all stemmed from me kind of telling goofy extra stories about these robots in the middle of this, gigantic, crazy movie that wasn't exactly character driven when it came to those guys. But it, so I just kind of use that, sorry, just to kind of to validate somewhat what everyone was saying, but also just to think about like these inspiration for characters and their interactions can kind of come from anywhere, and they can be completely ridiculous, like, oh, we got a bunch of cars that we're going to tell stories about, or there are these characters that we've built, or obviously any number of other things kind of in between. And really, to echo what Evan was saying, like what it comes down, there are lots of structures that we use, obviously, to create stories. And I think, something we obviously all kind of know about and talk about, and I think it's worth going into more depth on a little later, is the, your 3-act structure. You've heard your kind of hero's journey. Your, act 1 is basically your call to action. It's the hero setting off on their adventure. Act 2 is the series of tests, and there's some ups and downs, and then typically ends with like a brush with death. And then Act 3 is the kind of resurrection and hope and victory. Um, and that's great as a structure. However, and many great films and stories obviously fall into that. However, none of that structure works if the characters, if you're not engaged in the characters that you're watching and reading about kind of along the way. Um, and so part of what I want to do is really look at a couple of different movies that I think do it very well, and then kind of reference a couple that are not as good. Um, the fundamental concept is always character driving narrative as opposed to plot driving narrative. So, if you're walking out of your house and your character's coming out of their house and they're going right instead of left, well, what is the reason for doing that? Are they, if they're in a, they're confronted by someone, are they kind of punching them in the face, or are they turning around and running away? Are they pulling somebody else in front of them? Like, what are those character choices? What are those character dynamics that would cause them to respond in that specific way? So where I think where stories really fall apart, um, is when characters in stories do things that are fundamentally against their what they have been set up to do, or there's just been no setup and they're just doing kind of a one thing after another, just to kind of move the story forward. Um, so I think, one of the films I was thinking about as I was, thinking about how to set up this session was The Godfather. Right? It's one of my absolute favorite movies. I hope everyone here has seen it. But it is such a pitch perfect example, both of the kind of three-act structure. Like, it is this. It's very, very classical in its setup. It's obviously kind of an anti-hero that they're dealing with, and it's very much Michael. It's the kind of youngest son's descent as he is, kind of moral descent as he is ascending the throne of this family. But he is, and every character in that is completely consistent throughout the movie, and I think that is kind of it's just the bellwether of what we should all be striving for. So for if I assume everyone knows it, but just in case, mafia family, the Corleones, and Michael is the younger son who's just returned. It's post World War II. He's this kind of war hero, but he is the clean son. He is not involved with the family business, um, but he's a former soldier, and he is very directly kind of avoiding this, and the family is trying to keep him out of it because out of the kind of business, because they want him to be respectable. They want him to kind of become the Senator Corleone, or the the whatever, the Attorney General. But having set up Michael as being kind of fundamentally resistant to the pressures to join the family and the allure of this kind of lifestyle, he does have, from early on, he has this kind of ruthless streak that is visible, so that once he makes the shift into I'm on the family side, it happens really when his father is someone tries to kill his father, and he's like, I'm with you now, Dad. And from that moment on, he is 100% in, and he is totally consistent. He is still kind of caring, he's thoughtful, he's reserved, but now he's all those things in the service of um, the family, not in kind of not as a sideline to it. And the other characters are very much the same. So his older brother Sonny, absolutely kind of rash, impulsive. He's set up from the very opening party, but like he's sleeping with one of the bridesmaids while his wife is in the next room, and like he's just this kind of idiot. Not idiot, sorry, but he is just incredibly rash and impulsive. And that is consistent and ultimately is what gets him killed. So, his death would feel hollow, and obviously spoiler alert again, I'm assuming everyone's seen this, but his death would feel hollow if it had happened for any other reason than this fatal flaw that he had. Same with the kind of other brother Fredo, who's this kind of weak character. Ultimately, is the betrayer in the second movie, but is 100%. He's always kind of trying to mitigate the family's impact on other people. He's always making excuses. He's making excuses for other people beating him up. Whatever. He's fundamentally non-confrontational, but he is the kind of character that is then going to be taken advantage of in the second film, and does ultimately betray Michael, and pays the price for that. But I think those are all just kind of examples, consistent examples of these the absolutely these kind of fatal flaws and key characteristics of the lead characters in this movie, really following through on those arcs throughout. And very specifically, there are a couple of things, and we'll dive into this more. And we've actually got some kind of worksheets and stuff that we'll start to kind of distribute and talk about and things a little later. But the things that I always like to kind of ponder initially with characters are, what is my character's prime motivation, and what is my character's biggest flaw? Prime motivation, biggest flaw. Because I think then, and hopefully those two things are in conflict with each other, right? So it could be my prime motivation is money, but my biggest flaw is I like to spend it quickly. So these two things are going to come into competition with each other. It could be that it could be that I value kind of law and order. However, I'm addicted to drugs, and so these things are now going to come into kind of direct conflict with each other. So I think that as a place to start is always my absolute favorite. I do know it's funny. Like there's plenty of writers that I work with who, when they're thinking about a new character, they're like, oh, it's not those two things because those are very kind of classical. But it's like, oh, what's my character's favorite color? What music does my character like? What is, are they a dog person or a cat person? Do they, obviously gay, straight? Are they, those kind of, as opposed to going straight to the core, it is these kind of slightly more, peripheral decisions about them. I don't mean to minimize any of those things, obviously, but these kind of interesting little side questions that can lead to the discovery of more and more interesting stuff. So, if it is, what is the kind of, what music do people get inspired by, and what music does my character, what music my character listen to when they're down? Well, if it's Metallica, that's going to be very different. That's kind of implies a different kind of person than if it's Mozart. And that can then inform how they react to situations. So maybe if it's Metallica and they're down, well, they're going to is anger kind of a part of that feeling down? So when they get put in a position where in the story that you then write, where they are being put upon, where things are going against them, is anger then a natural extension of that question? Possibly. But you kind of get to you can get to these places, but just in slightly more kind of interesting and tortuous is the wrong word, but just kind of potentially slightly more convoluted ways, but that actually flesh out and enrich your characters that much more. Excuse me. And I think the goal with all these things is hopefully you get to a place where, as you're writing, the characters are almost making the choices for you as you go. I think, and there's a couple of people on this call who have had this experience. Evan and I have certainly had it where it just starts to flow, but it does become this thing where the character is dictating what they would do. So you may need a character to turn around and punch someone, but what they do is actually pick up a child and use them as a shield. Well, in a fight, as it were, that spins the story in a totally different way. That sets things up very, 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 very differently. But it can feel much more real to the story and to what this person is and how they are. I think it's funny. I read about this years ago. There's a great book by John Fowles called The French Lieutenant's Woman. And at one point, John Fowles enters his own novel to comment on the fact that his characters are doing things that he did not want them to do. And I remember at the time reading it and thinking, this is kind of pretentious, writerly stuff. Like, no one really does that. And my dad did the same thing. And my dad is, there are lots of writers in my family. My dad is not one of them. And he very much responded the same way. Um, and but having them experience that firsthand, like, oh no, wait, that's completely valid. That is just the kind of that is when truly the character is doing the talking and not the author, which is kind of fantastic and incredibly exciting. Um, so, excuse me, coughing slightly. We had a colossal rainstorm here just recently, and now everything is rather wet, so I'm choking rather. Apologies. Um, so yeah, that's as a place to start, and I think this will be obviously the first of a number of things, but it is that the kind of the pondering around. All right, how does who are my characters, and then how do I put them in situations? And this is kind of the next part of the story. How do I then put them in situations that will test those parts of their character? So coming back to Michael Corleone and The Godfather, well, he is clean, he's out, he's not in the family business. His father there's an attempted assassination on his father, and he goes, he's still out. He's still like, this is the business. He's not, he knows dad's a dangerous thing, but he goes to visit him in hospital, and he realizes that the guards on the hospital door have gone, and the hospital's abandoned. There's no one watching his dad, and so he realizes, wait, someone's coming back to kill my father, and that kind of confronts his need to be kind of orderly and disciplined and kind of moral. He does have a kind of morality in there that confronts that to the degree that it overcomes it. So now everything that he was that kept him on the kind of straight and narrow is now focused on protecting his father. But by taking that step on the dark side, as it were, no, dark side protecting his dad, but by taking that step into that life, he's then kind of all in, and he's that too plays with his approach to life. He is quite kind of black and white. He sees things. He sees subtlety, obviously, but he is not. He deals in a kind of binary world. He's not about shades of gray initially, and that too very much tracks with the decision to great. Now I'm protecting my father. Now I'm in, and I'm all in, and that's going to involve killing all sorts of people and doing all sorts of terrible things. That's fine. I'm just there. So yeah, again, it feels incredibly consistent. And so yeah, I think as kind of an initial outline, just to kind of look at what those characters are. I think there's a couple of resources that I want to kind of look at as well that I think do a very good job of discussing some of these things. One is a book I read years ago called Good Scripts, Bad Scripts, that does talk about literally it looks at 25 scripts, and there are half of them are good and half of them are bad, and it talks about all this stuff in kind of incredible detail, and really goes into like, great, why do these movies work? What makes them tick? How are they consistent? It also points out kind of fatal flaws in otherwise very good movies, or good characters in otherwise bad ones. It's they're not necessarily contradictory. But Good Scripts, Bad Scripts is great, and then Devin was talking about kind of how to make, why do you follow a character? What do what makes you want to stick with a film or a story or a book or whatever it might be? And that is obviously having a character that is in some way relatable. I think there is this conflation often of likability with characters and relatability. And I think there is certainly this push in the kind of Hollywood system to make likable characters. There's a book called Save the Cat that's out there that's actually great. It talks about movie structure, and it's very, very formulaic. It's a kind of great place to start. Read it and then abandon it as you won't. But that does talk about, and I think it's kind of interesting and accurate. Every hero has to have their save the cat moment, hence the title of the book. And that is simply the moment where they do something that gets the audience on their side. So they pull a cat, they pull a cat out of a road from in front of a speeding car, or they, help someone in some way, or they donate, or whatever that might be. There is a moment in there where they do something that is kind of, even if they're a bad person, to a significant degree. They do something that people go, oh, that's nice. Okay, I can understand that. And then as long as their choices in the story are then consistent, we will typically go along with that as an audience. It does, I think, there are certainly examples of it, and I can't quite think of any right now, but I know they exist, of stories where it is just kind of irredeemable people doing worse and worse things. But even you look at something like Succession, which is kind of an amazing show, that has even Roy, what's his name, even the main kind of family head in that, the kind of Rupert Murdoch character in that, he has just enough little openings of amusement, interest, sensitivity, vulnerability, and I think that can be a big one. I hear the thunder behind me happily. Um, Vulnerability to make you kind of go along with him, so even when he is being absolutely terrible, you still want to keep watching. And the same thing with his kids. Um, and I think it's that's kind of quite brilliant. I think The Boys does it very, very well as well. You look at Homelander with The Boys, who's just this absolutely terrible person. And every now and then there is this chink in the armor where you realize he's basically this damaged kid. And everything he does, everything that he is a reflection of that to some degree. And it doesn't mitigate the terrible person he is or the terrible things he does, but it does keeps you engaged enough with him that you want to kind of keep watching his story and kind of in a weird way, rooting for his death, but still interested in his life, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think that's actually where we can stop tonight. Like I say, I want to get more into the kind of hero's journey and all that kind of fun stuff next week, and really dig into the kind of character versus dig into some of the kind of character traits, and we'll talk about some of the things we've put together and all that kind of fun stuff. But I'm actually going to hand it back to Eben for a little bit because I think we've got a little bit of homework potentially to assign if anyone is into it. And then obviously we can answer questions and kind of go from there. So yeah, let me hand it back to you.
Perfect. I love 100 on everything you said. There's a couple of things I just want to highlight, just because I think for anyone that may be a little newer to thinking about this, or this process of kind of how do you create a character that you want to follow through some sort of narrative. You said this, but just the double down on it. I think the two main takeaways, at least, that have been the most impactful for me, is number one, getting one way or another, whether it's through the music they like or just a broader concept of what does this character want, like where did they think they want to go. It doesn't mean that's actually what they are going to end up getting, but what do they think they want, what's driving their actions and decisions. So I think that's kind of number one, kind of one way or another, finding that for the characters that you're telling the story about. And then the other thing is, stories are not just about one character. So you may have a protagonist, but it's also worth thinking about, who are the characters that this main character or main characters are interacting with. And if you can also start to get a sense of what do those characters want, what's driving them, often that really creates a lot of the narrative, at least the beginning of the narrative. So if you think of, especially in kind of broad general terms, you've got a hero that wants one thing, you've got a villain that wants something else, and it's the direct opposition of those wants that creates the story, that creates the conflict, that drives the narrative forward. So I think that as a just fundamental starting point, especially if you're thinking about creating something with a character that you have or own, then I think that's a perfect place to kind of really start thinking, and that actually leads into the optional but very suggested homework assignment. Encouraged, thank you. So we're going to have these sessions weekly at this time here on Twitter Spaces, but we also want to interact with you throughout the week. So if you're engaged in this process and you want to kind of dive into this, then we will be doing stuff on our Discord specific to the different topics that we cover. So discord.gg/macroverse, relatively easy to find. We'd also just love to meet and talk about Web3 and storytelling in general, because we do think, in our humble opinions, we think this is one of the core use cases for all of this technology and ethos, and the things that we're so excited about in the space. As all of this matures, we think entertainment, storytelling, and the ability to have a lot more ownership and governance over entertainment and storytelling is one of the most exciting aspects of all of this. So even if you just want to come out and hang out and talk about that, we'd love to meet and connect. But if you're going to follow this kind of series of classes and exercises with us, then the optional but encouraged homework is to come onto the Discord, introduce yourself, say hi, and then you'll find a Storytelling 101 channel. I'll make an announcement post about this so it's easy to find. We'll put a link to this recorded session in there. And then you'll find a thread where we'll invite you to just take a character. It could be, one of ours. It could be one that you own from a different collection. Any character that you're interested in working on a story for, that you can kind of use as the protagonist, or main character, or one of the main characters in a story that you'd be interested in telling, even if you have no idea what that story is at the moment. And just very simply think about and write something about what that character wants, and why they want it. So just a very simple, here they are, drop a picture in there, give us a little short description of who is this character, what do they want, where do they want to go. And then if you feel like you want some extra credit, you could also throw in, any additional information or details. What are their weaknesses? What are they afraid of? What's their worst fear? Anything like that. But just fundamentally, where do they want to go? What do they want? What is their, their main focus as far as where they might, desire to head over the course of a story. And then the final thing I just want to double down on, and what Adam said, is, a lot of us starting out really do feel like we have to find ways to make these characters likable. And I just want to reemphasize what Adam said, that some of our favorite characters, if you think across the different types of media that you probably like, whether it's, I'm an unabashed Star Wars fan, so we love Darth Vader. We don't love Darth Vader because he's the good guy, even though obviously there's a redemption story there. But he's just a fascinating, interesting character. Or in The Boys, it's kind of hard to argue that Homelander is he's the villain of the show, but he's the most fascinating, interesting character in the entire universe, in that entire series. So it's like, it's really his show, even though he's the villain of it. So I think, we want characters that we're interested in, that we can relate to, that we can ideally see some part of ourselves in, and, sometimes the worst parts of ourselves in, or, some reflection of ourselves in. But it really doesn't mean making them, the hero necessarily, or the stereotypical kind of likable hero. So I just want to, re-emphasize those points, invite you guys to come play. We'll have a different topic every week, and if you follow this entire session, this entire sequence of sessions, you'll have a story at the end of it. And then if it's a story that is within our power to do something about, we may be able to do something with that together. So we'll end it there. If anybody wants to hop up and ask a question, or if you've got a comment, we are certainly here for it. So if that's you, raise your hand. And otherwise, we are definitely here, same time, same bat channel next week. If no hands go up in the next couple of moments, we'll wrap it up there. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. Awesome, guys. Thank you so much for joining. We'll be back next week.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.